We all know how short life is. After all, the mortality rate is still tracking at 100%. Even though this life is short, we still don't want it to suck. This podcast is all about tools and insights from psychology, philosophy, and spirituality to help this journey suck less. In fact, we may even learn how to embrace the life we have while creating the life we want. I'm Morgan, and this is the PS We Expire podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Brooke, I'm so excited to talk with you today about your therapy practice. I want to ask you so many questions about couples. I want to ask you, I just have so many questions for you. But first, can you kind of just give us like a little insight onto what type of work you do and what type of therapy you do and who you work with?
Sure. So I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I've been in private practice now since 2015. So going on 8 years. And I work with entrepreneurial couples, on founders, and I would say women in transition. So what that means is a lot of women who are maybe looking at their lives and going, something's not working. I don't know what it is. I know I need to make a change, but I don't know what that is. So that means I might get a lot of women kind of around midlife. And for whatever reason, I seem to be able to help them walk through that transition.
What are some of the things that precipitate women starting to ask themselves that question? Like when you're working with clients, what are some of the things that actually get them into the seat in front of you? Because I do think that, there are a lot of people that kind of just have this like nagging feeling at the back of their minds that like, I don't know, maybe I'm not, fulfilling my potential, or I don't know what my purpose is, or as kids are getting older and the motherhood role is changing, what are some of the things that you see that are precipitating women actually coming to you and saying like, okay, enough is enough. I need to figure this out?
You mentioned the motherhood role. I think that that's a really, really big one. And I would say that I get a lot of moms who are maybe kind of early postpartum. So they're maybe just had a baby a year ago, or they're still like kids under the age of 5. Or so I would say that elementary school years, I don't see many moms with the elementary school years because there's kind of a lull. Like it's like, okay, you're just kind of
The
in the
calm
road.
after the storm.
Yeah, you've kind of like survived the baby years, but you
Mm.
haven't entered the turbulence of the teenage years. Um, but then I see a lot of women with older children, so babies and or older children. And I would say it's with the shifting roles of motherhood and societal expectations. They also are maybe feeling like, is this it? Was this all I was
Mm.
supposed to do? Um, I know for a lot of women, they were raised with this paradigm of, become a wife and a mom, and that's the thing that's going to fulfill us. But really, what I find is that a lot of women are saying, yeah, but that was something I did, but that wasn't really me. And also, like now that the busyness is shifting, right? When we're looking at maybe kids who are growing out of the house, it's like, well, they don't need me anymore. Or the way that children need you is shifting and changing. And so, how do you adjust to that? What does that mean? And also, what does it mean to support children into growing up? If maybe you don't know what you wanted to do when you grew up, except be a mom, right? But we don't want to necessarily teach our daughters that anymore, or do we? Like,
Mm.
what is that? What's going on now? I find that there's a lot of gender issues at play
Hmm.
for women that they're wrestling with.
Is that some of what you see most frequently when you're counseling couples?
Um, I would say that definitely there's a lot of gender issues at play for sure. A lot of I would say lack of empathy on both sides,
Hmm.
kind of for what the other person is experiencing. I do see men and women. And let me preface this by saying I see mostly heterosexual couples. Occasionally I will get a same-sex couple, but mostly I see heterosexual. So I just kind of want to preface that. Kind of in more traditional situations. And so sometimes I would say the weight of the roles can be really heavy on both partners, right? The traditional role of provider for the men and the traditional role of homemaker for women. People can get really stuck in that, and they're not really relating from their truest selves. They're relating from the roles.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it. And I think that probably one of the problems is that we're not very good at defining what those roles are, that we come into these relationships with these stories and models of what marriage looks like from our parents. And we have these ideas about what these roles are and how we fit into them. And sometimes the tricky part is that we don't actually naturally fit into that role that we saw modeled to us. And some of the tricky part is that the role isn't clearly defined. So there's so many unspoken expectations about what the other person should do, what they should be like, and how they should relate to me and the kids, and whose responsibility is it to take out the trash. I don't know. And if you're not talking about those things, you can just have so much conflict and be just perpetually pissed at the other person, and you maybe don't even know why.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up the trash one, I mean, that is one of those things where it is such an unspoken assumption that maybe some people, like different families, do all these different things in different ways, right? We talk about the invisible rules, right? That every family has, that it's like, we do this, we don't do this, we do this, we don't do this. And I think that every marriage is a multicultural marriage. Like, even if you came from similar cultures, every family has their own unique culture, and we bring that to our marriage for sure. And that's embedded within the broader systems, right, of American culture, than religious cultures and ethnic cultures and all the different cultures. And so there's so much unspoken. So much unspoken.
I was just thinking about, like, if I went to a job interview, like I applied for a job, I would not probably really want to work somewhere where they didn't have a really clear job description for me. Like, if I didn't know what to expect, I wouldn't know how to measure if my employer was like satisfied with my performance or what. And not that a marriage is, like being hired, but if you can think about it from a little bit of a zoomed out perspective, where it's like, if I'm running a business here, because there is a lot of overlap between entrepreneurship, business ownership, and running a household.
Oh my gosh.
And if we're not saying like, oh, hey, here's your job description, and both people are agreeing on it, like if one person is saying this is your job description, the other person is saying no, it's not, you're going to have strife and conflict. And so why aren't we having these conversations more?
Well, I think the other thing is that, more than taking out the trash or like listing out the different expectations that we might have, I think it goes even deeper. And the big thing I see is that people employ their partner unconsciously to make up for things that they didn't get. The problem is, for a lot of couples, I would say most couples, is that we're often unaware of the things that we didn't get until we get to marriage and our partner doesn't do it, and then we're mad. And we're like, you're not doing this thing. that I didn't know I really wanted. I didn't even know I wanted until
Mm.
you didn't give it to me. Right. And that's because when I work with couples, we're working with really unconscious, sometimes pre-verbal woundings, right? Because in couples relationships, it's an attachment relationship. So what that means is I look to you to help me feel safe in this world in a similar way that I looked to my primary caregivers too. And so if there was any kind of wounding in that primary relationship, it will probably get played out in our marriages.
Mm. That makes so much sense then why when someone doesn't take the trash out, why it's not just
Mhm.
a simple like, oh, you didn't take the trash out and you said you would. It's like, you didn't take the trash out, therefore you don't care about me, you don't love me, you don't think about me, you don't, you don't want to help me, you don't want to meet my needs, because it is, well, for some people that's going to be a non-issue because like you said, if it's not bumping up against one of those
Yeah.
core wounds or core absences in our
Mhm.
childhood, what we didn't get from our
Yeah.
caregivers, it's not going to be a problem. It's only when there's like that
Totally.
deep wound or that sense of unsafety or that
Mhm.
I'm not going to have my needs met that people start
Yeah.
to get really bristly and small things become big things.
Yeah. It's because it's not about the trash. It's like you said, it's about I'm not safe
Hmm.
because you don't care for me enough to think about the fact that I was really overwhelmed and couldn't you see that? And
Hmm.
you know, why couldn't you read my mind, right? That's a common complaint. But really, I in a way, it's not it's not totally off to and this is going to go against a lot of the I'm going to say pop psychology on Instagram right now, which that's a whole nother thing, which is
Hmm.
you can't expect people to read your mind. I'm going to say, however, we can, and I think we should encourage more attunement to each other.
Mm.
And in my mind, attunement is sometimes reading your partner's mind. It's because the truth is that we can actually. We know what our partner is thinking and feeling when we look at them across the room. Like we know. And so this idea that we can't do it, it's like, well, actually, like we can, but sometimes we are actively choosing to ignore it or like not do anything about it. Right. And that's okay. That's a whole nother other set of issues. But I actually do think that we can read each other's minds. And that's part of my approach in teaching more body-based awareness, right? Is that attachment actually is a nonverbal practice, right? And moms know that,
Mm.
dads know that, right? When we're developing attachment with our babies, baby isn't telling us what they want. They're just like making weird sounds. And we literally have to intuit and attune. And it does become a nonverbal dance.
This to me is like so obvious from psychology and neuroscience and the study of behavior that most of our communication is nonverbal.
Right.
Most of it, more than 70% is nonverbal. And so
Right.
this makes perfect sense what you're saying. Like when your partner or your spouse is not doing okay. You can sense when they're overwhelmed. But my question is then, how do we become
Mm,
regulated ourselves so
yeah.
that we have space to look out for how the other person is doing? Because it almost is like
Mhm.
when my spicy son
I like
gets
it.
gets his behavior starts to escalate, and I'm feeling this like rage and dysregulation rising up in me because of my own stuff that I need to work through, and how our pattern works in our relationship there. And it hasn't been until I have started to be more self-aware and notice when that is rising up and be like, okay, what do I need to do right now, right in this moment, to break this pattern of co-escalating our emotions instead of me coming in as the parent and helping him regulate how he's feeling.
Yeah.
And we'd like to imagine that in adult relationships that it can be different, that everybody can just regulate themselves and it's fine. But that's not how attachment works. That's not how we want our relationships to work, frankly. Like it would suck for you guys to just be totally fine on your own. Like, it's nice to have someone else that can be in it with you. That's an important part of being human. So when we are learning how to break the patterns of dysregulation in our own bodies, what are some of the ways that you help bring your clients and even yourself like into this nervous system regulated space so that you can be in relationships in a more, not just positive way, but like a more attuned way?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of ways. I mean, I can't preach enough. And I totally get on a soapbox. My husband even, he's like, "You're on the therapy soapbox again." I'm like, "I know, I can't help it." um, is to do your own work, get your own therapist, um, I'm gonna say a therapeutic coach if you don't want to do therapy, like get a coach who is well versed in psychology and therapeutic methods. Um, because it is in that attachment relationship that we learn a new pattern. Because really the connection that we have with a therapist or a therapeutic coach, I'm going to call it, or a mentor, is an attachment relationship. And so we literally learn how to feel more regulated through that relationship, which then translates to maybe some of those wounds getting tended to um, in a way that makes it so that when your partner is dysregulated, your own stuff doesn't get activated as much. And maybe you have just a moment, because I think of the idea of slowing it down. We're never going to get it perfect or right, but we can slow it down. I'll just share with my own practice. One of the things that I've learned to do over the years is put my hand on my heart and go, okay, I'm feeling really anxious. And to just say it just like that. And I'm saying it to myself, but I'm also saying it to my partner to let him know, okay, she's not mad, she's not, and then it becomes this beautiful feedback loop of, okay, I know what to do when she's anxious, right? I know to come close now. Versus maybe before, the pattern was I was unconscious of my anxiousness, and so I would just be like doing things. Like I would be busy, but I would still be anxious, and I would actually be wanting a hug. I would be wanting that co-regulation, but I wouldn't be able to access that desire. And so doing our own self-work, and being mirrored enough through that therapeutic relationship, I think just helps us slow it down enough so that then we can break some patterns.
What happens when the couple is not on the same page about self-work?
Ooh, what do you mean by that? I think I know, but
Yeah, it seems to me, and this may be just a very gross generalization, that a lot of women get excited and interested in introspection and personal growth, and Well, I guess I would say, regardless of whether it's the man or the woman, that they then end up trying to pull their partner along with them, and that can
Yeah.
create additional friction. So I'm just wondering, like, when there's an
Mm.
imbalance of interest in a relationship, how do you what do you do with that?
I mean, I would say that's a common issue that
Mm.
actually brings couples to therapy, which is ironic because then the person who's saying they're doing the self work and the other person who says that they're not, but they're in therapy.
Mm.
Like, so like, well, but you're here, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah. Um, I, in that situation, I think that that is an opportunity for the person who's saying they're doing the work and they're saying their partner isn't. That's an opportunity um, to really work on the individuation process,
Ooh,
which,
talk about that more. What is that?
yeah, I know. So the individuation process um, is becoming our fullest self. I'm going to say, regardless of what others around us want for us, are desiring of us, or whatever kind of unconscious contracts that we might have been engaging in that maybe no longer work for us. And there's a great book. So there's a lot of stuff right now happening on attachment. So I'm going to kind of go on a
Mhm.
little bit of a tangent, but there's a lot of stuff happening on attachment and the science and all of that. And yes, that, but really, attachment leads to individuation
Hmm.
because it's from the feelings of connectedness and safety that then we can move forward into the more fullness of self. But that those feelings of attachment can become internalized within the self. And so that's within where we look at self-soothing, and saying, yeah, okay, I know you're doing this over here and I don't like it, but I'm still going to pursue that which lights me up, right? Um, so there's this great book. It was written kind of a while ago, I think maybe in the 90s, called Passionate Marriage by David Schnark. And he talks about the idea of the crucible of marriage.
Hmm.
I think any of us who've been married um, for any length of time, really, or just in a long-term relationship of any sort, can appreciate that term. And it's this idea that like marriage or a long-term relationship will bring up your stuff.
Mm.
Like if you think you don't have stuff, just be in a relationship long enough and it will emerge. Um, and so then what's reflected back to us sometimes then is our desperate efforts to maybe save somebody else,
Hmm.
right? Maybe because that's how we developed as an identity. Maybe we were the savior. Maybe we were a parentified child. Maybe we were, you know, the son or daughter of a single parent. Maybe we had a mentally ill parent. Like there's the list of things that can go on, right? But that can then be an opportunity to attend to our own woundedness yet again.
What are some of the, like, if someone is thinking to themselves, well, that might be me, how do I know if that's me? What are some of the self-reflective questions that they can ask themselves to
Mm,
see if they are in that category of trying to save
sure.
someone else, or some of these other, like, kind of sticky patterns,
Mhm.
or ways of relating?
Yeah, so one of the things is almost a rumination on what the other person is doing. So to me, when I hear a client just kind of, it almost becomes an addictive thought pattern.
Hmm.
What is my partner doing? What are they not doing? What are, oh, they said they were going to do this, but they didn't. They like, you know, and I think that really checking that, and I call it addictive for a reason, because I feel like it becomes this distraction and an avoidance of our own pain, to be thinking about what the other person is doing or not doing, their journey.
Hmm.
um and that's, I think, where then that term codependence can kind of come from. I don't necessarily 100% like that term, but I think that that paradigm did capture that we can become addicted to other people's problems.
Hmm.
And that was actually something I had to face even in becoming a therapist, and being like, wow, am I addicted to problems? Right. So I know this pattern well, right? Because even as a therapist, very, very early on, I had to really, really um, check that desire to save other people, and be like, oh, that's actually not my job. So what is my job? What is love? What is relationship? What is helping someone heal? You know?
Hmm. A question that pops into my mind right away is this these terms that, as I've thought about them more, I'm like, I guess I don't really understand what the problem is. And it's the term selfish and
Mm,
self-centered. So it almost seems like we've come into this new paradigm of relationship and introspection, where I don't know if the pendulum has swung too far from, if we were raised in a way like many of your clients are, to believe in like traditional gender roles, and um and much of the messaging that we get around there is this idea of the martyr mother, the
mm,
woman who sacrifices herself beyond an inch of her life for other people, always puts
mhm,
herself last, never thinks about herself. And then I see this kind of like the swing over to
mhm,
people then who are suggesting that you have to think about yourself first, and you have,
mhm.
all of these things, where it's like it has become to the point where it pushes this message of like hyper individualism, where
Yeah.
you don't need anybody else, and it's almost like this, like you were talking about with the differentiation or the self identification, apart from focusing totally solely on that person. But sometimes I think the pendulum swings too far until it kind of finds that equilibrium between thinking of other people and also considering your own needs. So
Mhm.
how do we deal with what might come up in ourselves, particularly as women and mothers, when we feel like taking care of ourselves is selfish and wrong? I had to deal with that, like these feelings of shame bubbling up when I
Mm.
started to tell my family no about certain things, because I needed to take care of myself in a way that was like off limits before, I couldn't consider before. And so it's like all this wrestling of this shame of taking care of myself and centering myself at least enough to figure out how to be healthy.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I think that when we take care of ourselves, it only increases our capacity to relate to others. Um, it only Now, obviously, right, that comes with a caveat. I think we are seeing um sort of an explosion of this narcissistic hyper individualism,
Mm-hmm.
which I think that you're alluding to. Um, and when I see people doing that, I'm like, yeah, that's not real healing.
Uh,
that's actually still a defense mechanism because you're just avoiding it and you're avoiding relationship and you're not really healing. You're just going to the other side of dysfunction.
Hmm.
You're flipping from the codependent, like my life is only about other people, to I don't need anybody.
Mm.
Like that to me is actually just two sides of the same coin. So I think the pendulum is swinging because people are thinking, well, if I just do the opposite, then that's healing. And it's like, yeah, no, healing is about embracing wholeness and tension and paradox and messiness.
Mm.
um, and generally that's why maybe some folks don't like therapy, is because that's hard
Mm.
to embrace the tension and the paradox of like this is messy
It
and it's
is
not one or
much,
the other.
yeah, it's much more satisfying to our brains to believe in the binary, to believe in black and white. And that is not how it actually works. We do live in much more of a nuanced, gray, messy, like you said, living with the paradox. That's a really, really difficult place to put ourselves, especially intentionally. And it sounds like many of the women that are coming to work with you have found themselves bumped out of the black and white into the paradox and the messiness of life, and
Mhm.
feeling like out in the open sea, kind of like, I don't know how to navigate this because there's nothing really concrete to hang on to. And before we started recording, you started to talk about discovering what lights you up. And
Mm.
that, to me, when you're in the swirly sea of paradox, is a great place to kind of drop anchor, is in this
Yeah.
practice of discovering what lights you up.
Hmm. I love the image that you created, right? This swirling sea of paradox. I love that, by the way.
Hmm.
But then dropping your anchor. Um, and yes, so when we can find that which lights us up, it is an anchor in the sea. It is an anchor in um, relationship turmoil, in parenting turmoil, in business turmoil, um, all life, just life's turmoil. There are these anchors, and um, when we find that which lights us up, the way I like to think of it is it's finding our home within ourselves.
Hmm.
Um, and that can't be taken away once we find it. It's like this treasure. um I had this one client um describe it as like this amethyst cave that he could just
Mm.
go to whenever he needed to, right? And I think that we all need to find that. And the question is, well, how do we do that? Right? Um, and it usually means returning um, to childhood in some way,
Oh God, returning to the scene of the crime.
kind of coming to the scene of the crime and going, when and where um, did I find pleasure? When and where did I find joy? When and where did I find bliss? When and where did time stop? Maybe it was time in nature. Maybe it was time with animals. Maybe it was time in books. Maybe it was time with friends, right? I was listing all the things that like I love, right? Nature, nature, books, animals. But every person has a different thing. My husband loves to skateboard, you know, makes me scared every time. Like, oh my gosh, this is so dangerous. But I watch when he does it, it's like home. Like there's a settling for him. It's like he is in his zone of flow, of happiness, and of self. For me, dance is one of those places. So when I'm dancing, I am home. And kind of everything else doesn't matter anymore. And really that feeling of home, it's interesting that I actually talked about two different body-based things, right? Skateboarding or dancing. Those are embodied practices. And I do think embodiment is pretty important to finding that sense of home, that sense of the ego mind turning off. And you're no longer narrating about what you're doing. You're just in it and experiencing it. You're fully in the moment. Yeah.
I had four words pop up as you were talking about just the different ways that you have found yourself in that place, in home, in yourself. And these discovery, comfort, connection, and movement. So the discovery piece was like when you're reading a book, like I bought my kids this encyclopedia of everything for Christmas. It's not a very big book, so it's obviously not everything, but we read that frequently, and not just for them, but for myself to be like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. You know, it's full of discovery, and it's this blossoming of curiosity in ourselves where we're like, there's so much life out there that I didn't know anything about. So it's discovery. And then when you talked about being with animals, immediately I thought of like snuggling up with a dog. It's the comfort of that, of being with another body that isn't requiring anything from you, but you're just enjoying being together. It's a wordless kind of connection there. The third one, connection, was this camaraderie with our peers, with our friends, with our loved ones, and then the body movement. And so I wonder if that's just like the recipe for how to find what lights you up. And what came to mind when you were talking about your partner skateboarding and how much it freaks you out, but you love watching him come alive when he does that. That I think is one of the most important components in a relationship that is frequently missed, is not only finding that in yourself, but when you see that in the other person, even if you don't understand it, even if it freaks you out, that you see how they come alive and you say, yes, more of that, please. And you find, I'm getting chills from head to toe here. You find ways to help that other person do more of that and become more of that. And I can't imagine a relationship that is at odds when you are trying to help the other person discover that part of themselves.
Yeah. I mean, you nailed it. And thank you for noticing that I was good at this, because I feel pretty good at it. But it's not without its challenges, right? I mean, I mentioned the fear around skateboarding. I could mention other hobbies that I have, but we'll just use skateboarding as one of them. That's then where that individuation journey and the healing journey has come in for me, of like, oh, okay, I'm anxious about losing my attachment person, right? Because my brain is very imaginative. I don't need to tell you what goes through my brain when he does that, right? And telling that little girl, that little frightened girl inside, it's okay. I've got you. I've got you. We want to celebrate this, because life is a dance of keeping our people safe and close, and also the bliss and the pleasure of watching them do themselves and be themselves. And that is the magic of life, right? Is when all of us are in our true self. I mean, it's amazing, right? Like I think about the conference where we actually met, back in Denver last summer. And one of the things that I noticed about the conference was that it just felt like there were lots of people there full of self. And it's a palpable energy in the sense that it creates then the opportunity for more authentic and deep relationship, when we're all in self.
It really does flip that phrase on its head. Oh gosh, she's so full of herself. Like that's what we heard growing up as kids, is like, you don't want to be like that person because they're conceited. And sometimes I wonder if it does play into that insecurity in ourselves, where when we see someone who's so confident in who they are, not only maybe do we feel a little bit confronted that we're not that confident because we haven't done some of that self-discovery yet, or the understanding the separation between ourselves or others, but also I wonder if we get a little bit freaked out about what that person is doing, how that's going to make me have to change, or that's going to, kind of make me have to evaluate that part of my identity that maybe isn't going to be intact if this person changes in this way. And I can see how that could be a real challenge in our most intimate partnerships and relationships, because when you are doing life with someone, it's impossible for that person to move 2 steps to the left without feeling the distance. And so when that other person starts to change or discover things about themselves, or start to participate in activities that maybe are difficult for us to come online with, some of that is just that wondering of like, am I still going to belong? If this person changes too much, am I still going to belong here? And that really does bump against one of the most primal, deepest seated needs of belonging.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think that's a question for most of us on this path of self, right? Is like, well, what if my self, quote unquote, says I need to go, I'll just say for myself, study abroad for a year. What would that mean for my relationships, And to me, that's where conversation comes in. And the healthiest relationships, whether we're talking parent-child marriages, workplace relationships, all relationships, the healthiest ones are the ones where we can support development of self while remaining connected. I'm saying that doesn't have to change our connection, even though it might shift the routine, but to me, life is always in flux. Life is always changing. We happen to have an almost teenager in our home, and to say we can feel the shifting sands beneath our feet is an understatement. Like, things are shifting and there's no's coming here and there and everywhere. And right, the task of adolescence is all about defining self. But also and finding belonging with a peer group. And the belonging doesn't always necessarily come from the parents as much anymore, which then parents can feel that shifting tide and be like, whoa, like, do you? And they still do need us actually very much through this transition. But I do think that every age and stage of the human lifespan requires conversation, flexibility, and sometimes systemic changes.
Mm.
I love systems theory. That's one of the theories that I studied in grad school that kind of gave me a lot of foundation to understand families, culture, and then now in my work with entrepreneurs, workplaces. And one of the things about systems is that they love homeostasis
Mm-hmm.
and are always trying to go back to homeostasis. And so anytime there's a change, there's going to be a little bit of chaos. And we are then all parts of the system challenged to find home within that chaos once again. And I'm not saying it's easy by any stretch, but
Mm.
I think that is part of all of our tasks at all stages of life.
Yeah, I wonder if as scientists discovered that the brain doesn't fully develop until the mid 20s.
Mm.
And, it hasn't been until recently that the conversation around neuroplasticity has shown through studies that, oh, actually your brain remains, pretty changeable throughout your life. But I wonder if we have this idea of like, okay, once I hit my mid 20s and my brain fully forms, then like I'm fully baked now. And I don't have to, nothing else has to change ever. And it's this really beautiful and sinister illusion that homeostasis all the time is possible. And so anytime we have any kind of upset or rupture in our relationships, we think that something has gone wrong,
Yeah.
when in fact, that means that something has gone right. Because
Yeah.
many, many people will stay in relationships, whether that's a work relationship, a
Mhm.
familial relationship with a parent, or with a partner or spouse, for a long time, just trying their hardest to maintain homeostasis.
Yeah.
Just keep the peace, just keep the
Yeah.
peace, and sacrificing their own needs, sacrificing their own healing, sacrificing their own addressing childhood wounds and trauma for the sake of keeping the peace. And at some point, because growth is inevitable, change is inevitable, evolution, personal evolution is inevitable, there will come something that breaks through and
Yeah.
ruptures the homeostasis, maybe in a big way. And so often I'll suggest to people, don't wait for that to happen. If things are fine right now, this is a perfect time when everybody's feeling pretty great to
Yeah.
start to address some of those deeper things. You don't have to wait for the big upheaval and the big rupture in order to start, because it's much, much, much more difficult to address some of those things when you're already both, whoa, like maxed out on, your own stuff that you're trying to work through, and then trying to work through as a couple makes it even more difficult.
Yeah. I mean, you said it. Growth is inevitable, change is inevitable. Um, that is a part of life. And when we experience change and rupture as bad, or that there's something wrong, um, that's a narrative I think that we can shift.
Mm.
Right. And I was an English major before I became a therapist. And so books are kind of my thing. And so I love the metaphor of the narrative and the story. And what is your story, about this? Um, and the cool thing is we get to change the story. We get to
Mm.
write a new narrative about what change means, and just like you said, it's inevitable. We, it's going to happen. And I like how you said, um, yeah, maybe make some changes while there isn't, before there's a big upheaval, because change is coming.
Mm.
And if you don't grow, um, kind of steadily, the growth will come traumatically.
Hmm. And thankfully that the something traumatic happening doesn't mean doesn't also mean something bad, because
Mhm.
all of us are probably familiar with PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, but there also is something called post-traumatic growth, which is really
Mm.
exciting to think
Oh,
about
it's
that, that yeah, there are going to be things that are upheavals. And if it doesn't come from within, it's going to come from without.
Mhm.
It's going to come from something that happens in our environment, or, people that we love will get sick or die, or, we lose our jobs or our company goes under. And those can all be times that we can use as a catalyst for profound growth and connection with others. They don't have to be life stopping. And
Yeah.
what I like about what you're talking about, of this self discovery of the light within, is that when, in the same way that in our relationships, maybe it's a good to dive below the surface when things are going okay, we can do that for ourselves. When I'm feeling pretty good about stuff, like, this is a good time for me to really discover some of those things as like preparatory work for hard things that are coming, because it's like, if
Yeah.
I do that now, and I discover that now in myself, that when the big thing happens, finding that place in myself is going to be easier because I'm more habituated towards it.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I mean, I would say that, I mean, just as a personal example, so rediscovering dance for me,
Hmm.
um, has been, um, a disciplined practice that now I just incorporate as a part of my life. And a part of my dance practice is a really unique practice, where we share our emotional journeys through dance to a community of people.
Hmm.
Um, and it's so fascinating to me because oftentimes I will go to class thinking I don't have anything to say. And then I dance like the most epic dance ever.
Hmm.
And my body, right, to go towards Bessel van der Kolk, the body keeps the score. Well, the body just tells our story, the body always has something to say. Um, and so always just returning to speaking our truth and um, finding home is such a great practice that then helps us when the big thing happens, because we already know how to say what's going on. We
Hmm.
already know what to return to, where to find our flow. Um, it is ingrained in us, and it is a safe place, that we can always have. So,
I definitely struggle with, I love that you're talking about movement as part
mm,
of the process of finding that home within ourselves, because I am someone who tries to pull the heartache up into my head as quickly as possible, and like, work through it in my brain instead, and neglecting how things get stored in my body. And so
mm,
some of the practices, even just around, exercising, has
mm,
been so helpful to me to have this healthy shift from, trying to force my body to look a certain way, which is what many of us do from the time that we're, go through puberty and our bodies change.
mm,
um, to this shift of, like, how do I attune to the emotion that is present in my body? And
mm.
that's a really beautiful way to express that through dance. Have you incorporated that into some of your therapy?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I definitely attract clients who are interested in body-based practice.
Mm.
And so we definitely um, do that from time to time. I have been known to lead people in some different dance movements if they're open to it, and if it feels like right in the moment, for sure I will incorporate that into the work. Um, in 2024, it's been one of my intentions to lead a couple of workshops. That's on the list of things to do. kind of more specifically dance related. I have done some workshops with large numbers of women before. So looking at doing a little more of that. But in my work with even if I'm not incorporating dance techniques specifically, I am, and I guess I'm telling my secrets here, always trying to get clients in their bodies. Um, whether that's deep breathing, pain, mindful eating, mindful exercise. I love what you said about the mindful exercise. Any sensory experiences that they can have, doing things with their hands, feet, I mean, kind of just anything. But I am always really, that is definitely a goal, a therapeutic goal that I always have, is how can I help this person just feel more and let the emotion move where it needs to move. And it can be as simple as like one time, and I love that you mentioned the exercise, because exercise will move things, but then we have to have discipline to the practice to let it move. Like last spring, I was going through a particularly hard time with my daughter's father who lives out of state. There was just some fun legal things happening that were actually, it was really terrible. But what I remember going to the gym and just being like, okay, just go move, just go move. And I tried to go for a run, and immediately starting a run, I could just feel the emotion coming up. And I was like, okay, I am not going to stop this. So I stopped the treadmill, went to the bathroom, and let myself have the cry I needed to have. And then I could work out again. Like, but it was the initial movement that kind of got it stirred up, if you will. And I was not going to the gym with the intention of like, I'm going to go have a gym bathroom cry. That was not what I was trying to do. But just getting the body moving, my body was like, oh, yep, we've got some things to say. Like, and it's not, I'm running the treadmill today. You're going to go cry it out, and then you're going to come back and walk.
What I hear in that is like such deep self-trust, because so many of us will be like, oh, here it comes, like the emotions coming up, and like get back down there, and or like power through, or and that's, to me, that's like, that's a lack of self-attunement, where we see our own body language from the inside. We have that interoception where we can sense something is not right and something needs to move or something needs to come up, and we perpetuate the same patterns that we do maybe as we did when we were a kid and someone told you stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about, and then we just tell ourselves those things, and that's why there's a lack of integrated healing. Is that if we continue to tell ourselves like your feelings don't matter, your feelings aren't a big deal, and even thinking about this, how we were talking earlier about this conversation around selfishness and women taking care of themselves, if we've been told, particularly in those really formative early years, that our needs don't matter, and maybe we weren't told that directly, but we were told that through behavior when we would say what we needed and that need wasn't met, then we develop this belief that our needs aren't important. And then when those feelings do come up, unless we're aware of that internal story that has been written for us, and we continue to write that our needs are not important, our needs don't matter, our feelings don't matter, our feelings are too much, then we will continue to stuff. And that is one of the things that ends up creating a big rupture in our homeostasis, when we just stuff those feelings. And that's one of the things that I really loved about I guess we didn't say what the conference was that we were at together, but it was the psychedelic science conference put on by MAPS. in Denver this last summer. And one of the things that interests me so much about psychedelics, as one of the modalities along the spectrum of tools that are available, is that it is one of the tools that allows us to dip below just our cognitive aware brains that are trying to think about all these things, and helps us process everything that's underneath the surface that we don't readily have access to apart from some of these somatic methods of movement, dance, art, and, you know, perhaps psychedelics.
Yeah, I mean, the exciting thing about psychedelics is that it does seem to help people access the unconscious and the unspoken nonverbal stories that are being told over and over in many ways. And it brings them right to the surface, which I think is then why there's a lot of fear around it for some people, is that they don't necessarily want to know the unspoken stories that are underneath the surface. It's kind of like, hey, let's dig into your dreams, you know? Right? Which we've been, you know, therapists and psychologists have been using dreams, you know, since really the beginning of the practice, you know, that it gives us a window into the unconscious. And I think psychedelics do that as well. But what we're seeing in the research, right, and this is what I love about the research that is happening, is that it is actually demonstrably showing us what happens when we look at those old stories. I mean, you know, we're all reading the research and looking at the profound effects and going, oh, okay, so, you know, that thing that we say we're afraid of, it's really just something new. You know, it's really just something new. It's just a news story that is yet to be written. And we can't even imagine what that news story might be. You know, I think a lot of people are afraid to come to self-healing work, whether that's therapy, psychedelics, dance, art, because they're afraid of what will emerge, so to speak. And they think it's going to be horrible and awful. And 9 times out of 10, it's actually really beautiful and great. Yes, is there pain? And part of the process is attending to the pain. But what we discover is that the pain actually lasted not as long as we thought it was. And then on the other side of that pain is joy and connection and an anchoring to self that creates it's funny. I actually thought of the verse, a peace that passes all understanding. That old verse, you know. And it's that idea that connection to something very much bigger than yourself. Itself, and also bigger than self, you know?
Yep. How the self fits into the whole, how the sentence fits into the chapter in the book. I think you're right that, you know, some people are rightly cautious about stirring the pot of the subconscious mind and having things bubble to the surface that they have effectively been able to cope with by closing that part of themselves off for a long time. And I do think that one thing that worries me about the psychedelic, you know, revolution or whatever, renaissance, whatever's happening, is that studies are showing that we are more alone, more lonely than we've ever been in, you know, a big chunk of human history. And if we are going to introduce any type of tools that help us access those deeper parts of ourselves, the worst way to do that is to be alone while you do it. Because if you don't have the support and the scaffolding, the structure to help rebuild when some of those really foundational stories come crumbling down, or you understand how to rewrite them, if you don't have people there to support you and uplift you while you're doing that, that's a recipe for disaster. That's a recipe for more harm.
Yeah.
So I like this. What I liked so much about the particular sessions that I went to and some of the workshops that I went to was how important the support and integration was of these psychedelic tools. And we can talk about that too in regards to any of the modalities that we use in healing. When we're talking about doing the deep work, the really deep work that does require quite a bit of effort and sometimes a lot of time, sometimes a monetary investment, not always, but sometimes if you're going to have people who know what they're doing, it's an investment in many, many ways.
Yeah.
And it does make me nervous that someone would embark on that journey by themselves. And so I guess I'll just say as like a little PSA here,
Totally.
don't if when you're doing this kind of introspective work, please don't try and do this when the pendulum has swung so far to the point where you're on the opposite side of the coin and you're believing that you can do it all by yourself or that you can't trust anyone, you can't rely on anyone, you don't need anyone else. You do. Right. You absolutely do, especially if you're going to do some deep healing.
Yeah. And quite frankly, I mean, I don't think deep healing happens alone.
That's right. That's right.
And so when people talk about, doing these different types of self journeys, I'm like, well, we need people. We are a social species. We need people. And it is through relationship that we are wounded, and it is through relationship that we are healed. There really is no other way that I've come across. And even when we're talking about the psychedelics, I mean, those are all the research, it's all happening in a context of therapeutic connections.
Mm-hmm.
And like, yeah, we can look at the placebo of the medicine helping, right? But also the people who just got the therapy also improved.
Yes.
So
yeah.
Did the medicine help more? Right? Yes. And statistically, but statistically, what it seems to be doing, at least this is my personal hypothesis, is that it's almost like it really creates the opportunity for that therapeutic encounter to become a part of people's neural structures. In a way that maybe without the medicine, we're not able to like as deeply embed it as otherwise. That's my hypothesis. I don't know.
I think that's a great hypothesis, because what came to mind is that when we're children, those deep pillars of our reality are put in place by our caregivers.
Yes.
Now, if our caregivers are dysregulated, if they're having, well, not if, but since, because all of us are working through our own stuff. And that's, that's a difficult thing to come to realize as an adult, that my parents, when they had me, were still kids themselves, and they're dealing with all their own stuff. And then here you've got this child that needs things from you that sometimes you can't give. But my point is that when we have those pillars in our reality put in place when we're children, those aren't necessarily the pillars that need to be there for us to be the most healthy in our lives. That perhaps one of the pillars, one of the stories that we were told as a child, again, is that our needs don't matter and that the things that light you up are not okay. And it seems to me that, in these medicines, in these, psychedelics, that we're able to kind of put different pillars in there. And that sounds like that's what you're saying. When it's done in a therapeutic setting, you have people that are regulated themselves and know how to help you regulate yourself so you can put new pillars in place. Yeah. And that's really exciting. That's very exciting.
It is exciting. Yeah. I mean, it creates, again, that we talked a little bit earlier about the neuroplasticity, right? It just kind of increases that neuroplasticity so we can learn more. Which to me, that's really the heart of the healing journey, is learning and being curious and saying, yeah, I can learn more, you know?
That's exciting.
So
That's really
exciting.
exciting.
So
And
exciting.
what a beautiful thing to work on for ourselves, because tying it back into our conversation about working in relationships, is to
Mm,
bring our curiosity to our relationships is a really phenomenal thing, because you start to get curious about the other person. And like,
mm,
yeah, maybe I've been together with this person for 5, 10, 15, 20, 40 years. I don't know
mm.
everything about them. And the
Yeah.
more that we can suspend our belief that like we've got it figured out, the more
Oh
curious
my
we can get,
gosh.
and the better questions we can ask for that other person. And
Mm,
all of us really
mm,
want to be known on a
mm.
deep level. We want other people to see us and say, yes, I see you. You're good and you are whole. And how can I help you be more alive and part of your world?
Yeah. Yeah. Curiosity is probably one of my favorite traits to both embody and also to teach and to help others find more of, for sure. It's really right. Richard Swartz talks about that being one of the markers of self, like self.
Mm.
He talks about self energy, and we've got all these parts, but then we've got the self energy, and he's like, what are the hallmarks of self? And curiosity is actually one of the number one features.
Oh, I love that so much.
Yeah.
What are some of the, because I have talked on this podcast a bit about IFS and
Mm-hmm.
internal family systems.
Yeah.
And what I would recommend is if you're new to just hearing, I know you're not, but if you as a listener is new to this, like what the heck is internal family systems? Just do a little Google search for
Oh
this,
my
because
gosh, it's
it
so
might
good.
blow your mind a little bit on how to integrate and talk to all these little parts of ourselves. But what are some of the other hallmarks of the capital S self? I don't think that I've heard this.
Mm, so curiosity, compassion, and presence are the top
Hmm.
three.
So
Yes.
when we are embodying those
Mhm.
traits,
Yeah.
curiosity, compassion, and what was the last one? I'm sorry.
Presence.
Presence. So when we're in that is when we can know that we are living from that inner light or that inner home.
Yeah.
Oof. Oh, I love that. So it's fun to think about what activities do I
Hmm.
do where I feel those things the
Yeah.
most? And let's do more of
Yes.
those. Do
Let's
more
do
of
more
those.
of those.
More of those activities, please. We've
Yeah.
got enough hard things. Let's
Yeah.
find that inner light. I love that this ended up being the thing
Hmm.
that we talked about the most, was that what lights you up, because I share this on an Instagram reel and I might as well talk about it here too. Um, but there's a poem by Albert Camus where just a small line in there talks about finding within yourself the invincible summer. And
Yeah.
I have really, that has just resonated with me so deeply, because it's this, the image that comes to mind of summertime, especially, I live in the Pacific Northwest, and so summers here make up for all the terrible months of rain nonstop, where you're
Yeah.
hiking in the greenery and the magical trees and the
Yeah.
beautiful balmy, low 70s, mid 70s. It's perfect. And so when
Mhm.
I think about this summertime, I think about those things exactly, like that I am curious about what's happening around me, that I am full
Mhm.
of compassion and connection with nature, with myself, with others. And why am I forgetting the third one again? You just said it. Oh,
Uh,
presence.
yeah.
Presence. And that I am so very fully present in where I am. And so that combined with just this beautiful idea of that internal invincible summer, even when winter is happening around you, that we
Yeah.
can do the work and the put the effort in, a beautiful effort that may not be as effortful as we think it's going to be, to find those things that feel like that.
Mhm. Yeah.
And what a beautiful and worthwhile pursuit. Like
Oh my gosh.
we're worth
Yeah.
pursuing that.
We're worth it. You're
Hmm.
worth it, Morgan. We all are. We all are.
Yes. Oh man. Well,
Mm.
what a beautiful conversation, Brooke. Thank you so much
Oh,
for sharing your lovely expertise and your personal experience and really practical ways for us to embody this
mm,
pursuit of wholeness. And thanks for talking really plainly and clearly about, some of the most common relationship troubles, because I think many of us wonder, like, is this normal? Is
yeah.
it just me? And
Not just you, it's every family ever across time and culture, and
mm,
it's everywhere. It's every
so,
family, every
oh
person.
man, I'll share in the show notes, of course, like how people can get a hold of you. And I'm
Sure.
looking forward to seeing what you end up offering this year.
Yeah.
With dance and teaching women in
Mm,
particular how to get back in their bodies. And that's really exciting.
it is exciting.
Yeah.
Morgan, I gotta run.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you
Yeah, oh my gosh, this
thank
is
you for all of
amazing.
this.
You're
Yeah.
amazing.
All righty. Well, and for
Okay.
everyone that's listening, yes, we expire.
Mm.